Who decorated it anyway?
In 1985, a movie hit theaters that seemed to capture the decade in a bottle. Once Bitten, a quintessential teen horror comedy about a high school virgin, a seductive vampire countess, and a race against time before Halloween. It was the first major film role for a young, rubber-faced comedian named Jim Carrey, and for many, it's remembered as a goofy, harmless piece of 80s nostalgia. A cult classic that found its audience through years of late-night cable rotation. But look closer. Look past the neon and the big hair. What if the awkwardness you see on screen, the jarring tonal shifts, the cheap jokes that don't quite land, aren't just bad filmmaking? What if they are the scars of a production so troubled, it nearly broke its creators? This isn't the story of a silly vampire movie. This is the story of a creative nightmare, told through 10 horrifying facts you didn't know. Number 10. The Ghost of Michael J. Fox. Every film production is haunted by the ghosts of what might have been. For Once Bitten, that ghost is one of the biggest stars of the decade. The film's original writer, Jeffrey House, wrote the part of the lovelorn virgin Mark Kendall with one actor in mind, Michael J. Fox. But when the script landed at the Samuel Goldwyn Company, an executive shot the idea down. The reason? They didn't believe Michael J. Fox could carry a movie. This decision was made on the cusp of 1985, the very year Fox would become a global phenomenon, starring in both Back to the Future and Teen Wolf. The latter, a film with an almost identical premise of a high school student's supernatural transformation, became a box office smash. This wasn't just a simple casting mistake. It was the first symptom of a profound disconnect between the studio and the story they were trying to tell. In rejecting the era's quintessential teen hero, they revealed an inability to grasp the very audience they were targeting. This colossal misjudgment, this failure to see the obvious, set a grim precedent for every creative battle that was to come. It was the first crack in a foundation that was destined to crumble.
I can be yours, Mark. Forever.
Number 9. Caging the Comedian. Having missed out on Michael J. Fox, the studio cast a then-unknown Jim Carrey. In hindsight, it seems like a stroke of genius. But on set, the filmmakers had a comedic supernova in their hands and had no idea how to handle it. The film's director, Howard Storm, had experience with brilliant improvisers, having directed Robin Williams on Mork and Mindy. Yet, he seemed determined to suppress Carrey's unique talents. Multiple accounts describe how Storm actively stifled Carrey's comedic instincts, stubbornly insisting that Lauren Hutton, as the Countess, was the film's true star. Carrey was relegated to playing the straight man, a role that was the polar opposite of his explosive physical genius. His now legendary energy is almost entirely absent, caged within a bland, reactive character. It only breaks free in brief, isolated flashes, a moment of goofing off in a clothing store or the famous dance number, moments that feel like they belong in a different, better movie. The horror here is watching a force of nature being contained. The film becomes a frustrating document of a singular talent straining against the bars of a weak script and misguided direction. It's haunted not by a vampire, but by the ghost of the comedic masterpiece it could have been, if only they had unlocked the cage. Number 8. The Sanitized Nightmare. The film that exists today is a pale shadow of its creator's original intent. Co-writer Jeffrey House's first draft, titled Nightlife, was not conceived as a goofy teen comedy. It was inspired by the dark, brooding art of Norwegian expressionist painter Edvard Munch. The goal was to create something visually and intellectually serious, a film that satirized high school fears through a dark, artistic lens. The writers envisioned teens invading a vampire movie, a story grounded in real adolescent anxiety clashing with classic horror. But the Hollywood machine grinds art into product. The studio wanted a simple teen film and systematically dismantled the original vision piece by piece. The opening scene at a drive-in theater was deemed too dated and replaced with a generic lover's lane. A key character, a history teacher who could lend the vampire lore some weight, was inexplicably changed into a bookseller with a phony, offensive Indian accent. This was a brutal, cynical process. A unique personal vision was fed into a commercial apparatus and emerged as a formulaic, market-tested commodity. Each change represents a soul-crushing compromise, turning a potential work of art into disposable entertainment. The original idea wasn't just rejected, it was dissected, sanitized, and lobotomized until it was safe, predictable, and utterly devoid of its original soul. Number 7. The lost scenes. The desecration of the writer's vision wasn't just conceptual. Entire sequences, major set pieces that were written, planned, and in some cases even filmed, were left on the cutting room floor. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, and here's the autopsy. An ambitious sequence set in an amusement park, which contained some of the writer's favorite scenes, was scrapped entirely. The studio declared it too difficult to do and more cartoon than live action, replacing it with the mundane laundromat scene seen in the final film. Mark's vampire nightmares were originally designed with a classic, gothic horror aesthetic, set in a B-movie graveyard. After the set was built, producer Samuel Goldwyn, Jr. decided it didn't match the movie's look. It was torn down and reshot in a sterile, all-white room, a change that made props like an obviously fake bat seem laughably out of place. An elaborate, mean-spirited wedding nightmare was filmed and shown to test audiences. It was met with complete, unnerving silence and was mercifully chopped from the film. Perhaps most bizarrely, a scene in a confessional was shot as written, but its dark, original punchline was redubbed over fears of a backlash from the Catholic Church. The studio replaced it with a generic joke, but left in the original audio track of a man audibly defecating in the next booth. A literal ghost in the machine, a haunting audio artifact of a bolder film that was silenced. Number 6. The punk vampire that never was. The creative suppression wasn't limited to the writers. Lauren Hutton, who played the 400-year-old countess, had her own subversive vision for the character, one that was much closer to the writer's original edgier tone. She took the role against the advice of her agent and wanted to play a punk vampire, imagining the character clad in rubber, a far cry from the silk gowns she wears in the film. This idea was, of course, rejected. Hutton later expressed regret, stating, "What I did wrong with was I didn't stick to my guns. I should have played a vampire of my own invention." Her instincts were perfectly aligned with the writers, who had originally hoped to cast the punk-adjacent horror icon Elvira in the role. The production was presented with a more interesting, aggressive, and contemporary take on its villain from multiple creative sources, and it rejected them all. Instead of a punk vampire, audiences got a performance that critics described as wooden and unnatural. It's another example of the film's defining characteristic, a systemic pattern of creative cowardice, a relentless drive to choose the safest, most generic, and least interesting option at every turn.
Now I don't blame you for looking, but you better not touch.
Number 5. Pseudo-porn for preteens. While the studio was busy sanitizing the film of anything artistically daring, it was simultaneously leaning into crude sexual innuendo to secure a PG-13 rating and lure in a teen audience. This cynical trade-off did not go unnoticed by critics who were merciless in their reviews. They called it sappy, sophomoric, and filled with jokes only slightly younger than its 400-year-old vampire. But one critic from the Orlando Sentinel delivered a truly chilling verdict. He argued that Once Bitten wasn't just a bad comedy, it was something far more insidious. He invented a new category for it: pseudo-porn for preteens. The review claimed the filmmakers had reproduced the tone, attitude, and situations of porn, but cleverly disguised it by substituting a vampire's bite for actual sexual activity, making it palatable for an underage audience. The horror here is the staggering hypocrisy. The same producers who were terrified of a single joke offending the Catholic Church were apparently comfortable releasing what was perceived as a borderline exploitative product designed to titillate children. They censored art but mass-produced sleaze, revealing a corporate morality driven not by principle but by a cold calculation of what they could get away with.
Gee, this place is great. I mean, it's beautiful. Who decorated it anyway? I think you beautiful dress too. I guess you made that yourself. I bet my mom would love to borrow the pattern.
Number 4. A joke born from pain. The film is littered with jokes that have aged poorly, particularly its reliance on cheap, homophobic humor. The most notorious example is a scene in the boys' locker room. Mark's friends, trying to inspect his inner thigh for a bite mark, are discovered in a compromising position. Another student walks in and yells a homophobic slur, playing the moment for laughs. For decades, this scene has been dismissed as a tasteless, dated product of its time, but the truth is infinitely darker. According to co-writer Jeffrey House, the scene was based on a personal experience of his own. Let that sink in. A real person's traumatic experience, a moment of public humiliation, of being targeted with a hateful slur, was taken by the Hollywood system, stripped of its pain, and twisted into a cheap punchline for a teen comedy. This is the alchemy of cruelty, the process of turning personal suffering into public mockery. The scene is no longer just offensive. It is an act of profound exploitation, a permanent celluloid fossil of a writer's private trauma, displayed for the world.
What were they
to
doing in the
laugh at.
showers in the first place?
They were washing. We were enacting a prison rape scene.
Oh my God!
She told us to look!
I knew it. I knew it. We enjoyed it.
Jimmy, would you shut up? Just shut up!
No, that's it. We're homos. We're rough rangers.
Number 3. The $2,000 deal. For all the pain and compromise they endured, what was the reward for the writers who created the entire concept? Jeffrey House and his writing partner, Dave Hines, sold their original screenplay for the shockingly low sum of $2,000. Young and inexperienced, they made the deal without an agent, leaving them completely vulnerable. And the studio exploited that vulnerability without mercy. During a grueling rewrite period, the writers' tiny paychecks were canceled before they could clear at the bank. For 3 months, they lived on nothing, their livelihood held hostage until they produced a draft the studio approved of. After a full year of this torment, when the script was finally greenlit, all of their allotted pay had already been spent on the endless rewrites. At the very moment of their supposed triumph, they were left completely broke. This wasn't a creative partnership, it was an extraction. The studio treated the writers not as the foundation of the project, but as a resource to be squeezed dry and then discarded. The creative abuse was built on a foundation of brutal financial exploitation. Number 2. The writer's breakdown. The pressure on co-writer Jeffrey House was more than just professional. While trying to salvage his script, he was also a full-time student. The stress became physically debilitating. He developed pneumonia, lost 15 pounds, and ground his teeth into jagged nubs. And then his mind broke. In the midst of the production hell, House suffered what he described as a mild nervous breakdown. The cause was a failed love affair with a girl named Robin. Robin, the same name as the film's chaste, virtuous heroine. The character Mark is constantly pressuring for sex. As his own real-life relationship with a woman named Robin was causing his mental collapse, House was being forced by the studio to write and rewrite scenes about a fictional Robin. The line between his life and his art had dissolved into a psychological torture chamber. He was trapped in a horrifying feedback loop where the act of creation was an act of relentless self-torment. He wasn't just writing a story, he was living in a nightmare of his own design, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Number 1. The hospital bed rewrite. This is the story that encapsulates the entire horrifying truth of Once Bitten. During One Story conference, Jeffrey House was in extreme physical pain. He was suffering from an acute appendicitis attack, but he showed up to the meeting anyway. He was so doubled over in agony that he couldn't stand up straight. The producers watching him simply assumed he was groveling. That night, his appendix exploded. He was rushed into emergency surgery and, in his own words, nearly died on the operating table. The very next morning, as House lay in his hospital bed, recovering from a near-fatal medical emergency brought on by the stress of the production, the phone rang. It was one of the producers. He wasn't calling to see if the writer was alive. He wasn't calling to offer support. He had one question: when the rewrite was going to be ready? This is the ultimate horror, a moment of pure, unadulterated dehumanization. In that instant, the writer was not a person who had just stared death in the face. He was a content-generating asset that was temporarily offline. A broken cog in the machine. This single phone call reveals the absolute nadir of industry callousness. It is the final chilling proof that to the powers behind this silly vampire comedy, a deadline was more important than a human life. Once Bitten was not a hit. It was a modest success that quickly faded, only to be resurrected as a cult favorite years later. A quirky footnote in the career of a future megastar. People watch it today and laugh at its 80s charm, its goofy premise, its awkward sincerity. But perhaps the film's strange, enduring appeal comes from the very real pain embedded deep within its DNA. The on-screen confusion, the stifled performances, the jokes that feel more cruel than funny, they are all faint echoes of the battles fought and lost behind the camera. The film is a haunted object, an artifact containing the spectral energy of the trauma that went into its creation. So, the next time you watch Once Bitten, remember the story you now know. Remember the artist whose vision was sanitized, the genius who was caged, and the writer who nearly died for a rewrite. Because the most horrifying fact of all is that this is how movies get made.